In order, roll call, please.
Painter,
Yes.
Stankrabber,
Yes.
Keel,
Yes.
Mead, Myers.
Yes. Okay, we are gathered here this morning for an open discussion on the EMS situation in the enterprise fund. I'd like to make a few comments as we get started. Obviously, the city has taken it on themselves to come to a resolve in this situation. Although I haven't been aware of any meetings that they've had yet to this point, 2.5 weeks later. Again, I'll repeat what I said before. It was a shock when we first heard it back in the end of May. And then it was obviously a shock to the council and to the rest of the commission who hadn't heard about it yet. And I assume it was everybody. And at that time, the fire chief, Pete Fletty, gave us a complete lowdown on the situation from having looked in and under every stone and tried to simplify it in about 7 or 8 pages. And that will probably be the basis for a lot of our discussion this morning. I would like to, we're continuing to get information from finance, and I have to say finance has been very cooperative. And city administrator Steve Barg has been very cooperative in trying to come to put a handle on this and to get something done with it. I think that if we hear some word from some newer information that has been provided in the meantime since we met with the city council, that'll be helpful to us in at least setting up a game plan for ourselves and to possibly offer some suggestions if they're received by the council on what we can do. I'm led to believe by somebody I respect a lot, who's good with numbers and is familiar with the situation, that this can all be taken care of within a year or two at the long end. So a lot of it, we will continue to get input from finance and from other people in the meantime as to what has transpired and what we can do different in the future. We got some newer information more recently in regards to everybody wants to put a finger on how much it costs per ambulance call. I warn everybody that this could possibly be part of a negotiation with the Marshfield Clinic Health Systems and the ambulance service that we provide to them with under contract. So I would advise everybody not to query that at this time. That would be something that would qualify under state statutes to discuss in closed session because it's a negotiation. And it would obviously affect our negotiations and our communications with the Marshfield Clinic Health System. So as much as it is interesting to find out how much of an ambulance call costs, I don't think we can go there in any discussion unless we're in closed session. It's one of the 2 things that state statute grants us the opportunity to discuss amongst ourselves so that it doesn't hinder our relationship with the clinic or hinder the negotiation process. So it's, I've asked Chief Letty to take the lead on a lot of the discussion. He's prepared to do that. Open the discussion at any point. Anybody has any questions or comments or suggestions, you're more than welcome, obviously, to pipe up and we'll go from there. Anybody have any questions about what I just talked about? I think that kind of leads into it a little bit. And Joe?
I talked with Alderman Wagner yesterday, and as council president, he is putting together a plan the council can use to take a look at the entire situation. He was hoping to have that for their next council meeting. Second point, I put together a list of 38 communities, both in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa, that Steve could contact to find out how they're running their operation, how it's being funded, whether they're, well, we've already found out we're in the minority with using an enterprise fund. But to put that together and, does the community have a private service? Is there a community group? Is it operated by the fire department? To what extent? And what's their present financial status and how are they funded? Steve's working on that right now.
I should mention that our responsibility is to oversee the operations of the fire and police department. I believe this is something that you're obligated to do. It's one of our duties to set direction, approve policies, procedures, etc. This definitely falls under that. I don't feel bad about us getting our own game plan going to try to facilitate the discussion that the council will be having, and where obviously the chief and his staff are willing and ready and able to provide any information that the city council wants. My number one objective, though, is to keep our staff informed, because obviously it's a question in their mind. We've had the opportunity to have a couple of them attend our meetings that have been going on. So a couple of them have had questions in the meantime, but I think the chief and his staff have been meeting on a regular basis just to address this one issue. But it's important that they be kept apprised of what's going on to ease their minds a little bit, because obviously it would have some repercussions no matter what direction's taken in the future. And I'm very concerned that they relax, they perform their duties, and not have to worry about things that we're here to discuss. And I only mean myself personally to provide only the best for them as far as equipment and working conditions. So, and I believe the rest of the commission will go along with me on that one, Chief. So that's why we're here to discuss it. So go ahead.
And I guess to that line that you just spoke of, our crews are being confronted out in the community. We know of at least one instance where we had two members out. They had 6 years experience between them. They were out doing a pre-plan on a building, which a pre-plan, if people listening or people in this room don't know what that is, that's basically so we can go out, look at an entire building, take notes on it, understand where fire department connections are, where fire alarm panels are, so we can better plan a fire attack on that building should one occur there. They were inside the structure. They were approached by the business owner, and I don't remember every statement. I had them write up a memo. I don't have that memo in front of me, but they were questioned, and I wouldn't say threatened, but aggressively talked to by this business owner regarding this EMS Enterprise Fund. These two firefighters obviously had nothing to do with this, and I just think it's time for us to put out a fact sheet. We've told our firefighters that if they are encountered or questions are asked out in the community, to refer them back to us here at the fire department, that they shouldn't have to deal with that their main objective is to conduct their pre-plans, do their fire calls, run their EMS calls. So just based on that and some of the information that this business owner was giving to these two firefighters, the statement this person was making was not accurate. So we did end up calling that person to ask if they had any further questions, and they're pretty aggressive on the phone as well. But we tried to just state the facts to them. But I think it would be good for us to get a fact sheet out to the community. I know we've been dancing around the issue of pointing fingers, and we're not trying to point fingers or do any of that stuff, but I think we need to get the facts out there to the public, because I think their rumor mills start and maybe misinformation gets passed around. So
I feel very strongly that way too. I think that the best way to keep the public as informed is to get that information out to them, and I certainly encourage you to do that, or we can do it as a commission as well, but I think you're the face of the department chief, so
yep.
look for you to put something, get it out there publicly somehow, your staff.
Yeah, we can do it on social media, we can do interviews or whatever we need to do, but I think it's very important to get the facts out there.
Yeah.
I just reiterate what Chief was saying. I've had a number of comments come my way, and when I sit down, I transcribed everything and typed it out. Very definitely that we have people in the public who have no idea how the ambulance service operates. Things range from, quote, "What's this fund? I thought we paid for the ambulance and EMTs with our taxes," end of quote. Since when does the city run a business? The fire department's a public service. Going on, somebody a bit more aggressive. What's this quoting now? What's this crap about paying City Hall? I think that's the service fees. They should be paying you more. Then there was some about what would happen to the fire service if we lose the ambulance service. Does that mean we're going to have firefighters? And some legitimate questions about if we have a lot of ambulances out, what happens to our fire coverage? One person asked, do you do what they do in Point and Plover? And if you're not familiar, Point and Plover, Whiting, and Park Ridge have an automatic first response system. So if there's a certain type of fire, each of the departments supplies a different piece of apparatus. So they've got a large amount of apparatus and more manpower. So that's the way some of these questions have gone. But I'll agree with you, Chief. We need a fact sheet because people don't know how we operate. They don't know how it's funded. And if they've heard about this fund, they have no idea what that is.
It might be good to take this time for people listening in that our EMS Enterprise Fund is run as a business. To go back to some of the comments about that we received regarding the EMS Enterprise Fund, we had one of the comments was, "How dare you overspend by $615,000?" For, I guess, to address that comment, yes, we are $615,000 in the hole according to current finance staff, and I think they've done a wonderful job addressing the bad debt issues and the write-offs and everything else. The problem is that hadn't been done over the past 5 years. We talked to current finance staff, and we've been bleeding out for the past 5 years with nobody saying a word to us. So I think it's important to know that the fire department runs EMS operations. That's kind of our job. We pay professional service fees for the finance department to manage the money portion of the fund. That's kind of the separation that we have here. So we receive a budget number from finance. Our goal is to stay underneath that budget number. This is what I was trying to talk about on August 2nd at that joint meeting, is once we get that budget number for 2023, our job is to stay under that budget number. And that's what we've done historically with that. We don't have accountants here to go over audit paperwork. In fact, an audit's really never been shared with us. I talked to the former fire chief, and he's never seen an audit statement at the end of the year regarding breaking it down, showing us what our bottom line is. We've asked what our bottom line is. We've been told we're doing fine. This is with past finance people. Current finance, again, I'll say are doing a very good job. We've got accurate numbers in there now, and I think we have a better grasp on where we're at. With that being said, going back to the way the EMS Enterprise Fund operates is based on our contracts that we receive from outlying communities, based on revenue we receive for providing EMS services, some grants and some other income that we receive. We're able to pay, we have in the past been able to pay for 11 2/3 firefighter salaries. We've been able to pay for all of our ambulances out of that. We've been able to pay for all the EMS supplies out of that. EMS also pays a portion of IT's salary, or I'm sorry, their entire budget, admin's entire budget, and finance's entire budget. They pay, our EMS fund pays 11 2/3 broken down. That's your professional service fees. So all of that I just mentioned, ambulances, 11 2/3 personnel, that does not go on the tax roll. So if we were to privatize, as Commissioner Penker mentioned, automatically we would lose 8 2/3 or 11 2/3 personnel, which would put us down to 9 per shift. When I started in 1997, we were at 10 per shift. So we'd be going backwards, even from 1997, dropping staff. And our call volume has been going up, has been skyrocketing. So it'd be very detrimental to both EMS and fire to privatize. Because I think what people need to realize is that we don't just have ambulance people. Those 11 2/3 salaries and benefits that are paid out of the EMS Enterprise Fund, those aren't just paramedics. Those are paramedics, they're firefighters, they're fire inspectors, they're confined space rescue, they're hazmat rescue, they're public educators, they're everything we do here. And our fire service would be taking a major hit.
One other point I want to make, just maybe for me, it was an easier way to understand the way this all works, is the EMS budget is taken out of the EMS Enterprise Fund. The EMS Enterprise Fund is managed by finance at City Hall. We don't have access to it. We submit our budgets every year, just like the fire protection, just like streets, just like every other department. Our budget requests are looked at and adjusted, approved by this body, and then approved by the Common Council. And that's what the chief referred to. When the budget comes back here, completely approved, that's what we work with. We don't deal with the EMS Enterprise Fund.
We have it historically anyway.
And up to this point, you actually, like a lot of other portions of your budget, it's the dollars that are available or that you should budget for are recommended by the finance department. So like the comment that you made that we've not overspent any year prior to this, and I say we because we approve whatever you guys bring forward to us. Then it goes on from there and the city pays the bills. It's worth noting that you have never exceeded the dollar amount that was available in the fund, or we as a commission have never approved anything without a recommendation from finance that it's safe to move forward in that direction. The last big case was when we added additional personnel in relationship to the claim contract. So we had the assurances from City Hall at that time that it was safe to proceed and we'd still be liquid with our funding in that account.
Yeah. So just maybe this for
Morning meeting will be in the conference room. Morning meeting conference room.
for this body's information too. I'm not sure if you're aware of how this works, but after the budget's approved here, there's a general conversation usually between the city administrator and the department heads if cuts need to be made through the PFC approved budget, if we need to meet the financial constraints of the city. So those conversations happen. Generally, there are cuts that have to happen, and we do that and work with the city on that. I don't know if that's ever happened in the EMS fund where things needed to be cut.
Generally, we cut them here, again, just trying to be fiscally responsible.
Right.
We look at all the requests that were made by the crews, look at the budget, what kind of an increase it is, and decide, well, we can live without this. Let's, try and keep the increases down.
So those conversations typically happen, and then it goes to council for approval. So,
Andy,
It seems to me that we have two issues at hand. One is we have $600 and some thousand that have been spent without revenue to support the expenditures. That's a situation that has to be resolved. And ultimately, it will be the council that resolves that. That's not what we do. The second problem is that we have, if you like, overspent the income provided by the enterprise fund for the last 3, 4, 5 years without knowing it, without having been told. And that's how we came to the shortfall.
correct.
What we have to figure out now is how to provide the same quality of service and add to the revenue side to cover those costs. And the city finance director on the second, when we held our joint meeting, if you remember, she was asked, what do you think needs to happen? And her comment was, somehow the EMS budget has to be supplemented. I think we can make recommendations about that. But again, unless we figure a way to redo the enterprise fund so that it generates more revenue, that's supplementing the existing budget is going to be the council's business. I mean, ultimately, they're going to have to do it. So it would seem to me what we need to do is make sure that the service we're providing, which we know is high quality, and that I think is the key to everyone's interest in knowing what does it really cost to do an ambulance run. That's a baseline number that if we don't have and they don't have, everybody doesn't have, we're gonna not know what we're talking about. We need to really figure out how much money do we need to add to supplement the enterprise fund revenue to keep things as we think of it as whole. And I'm not sure where to go with that. We've talked sort of informally about some additional ways to generate revenue. And I think maybe it's important to have a couple of those offered to the council so they can look at those too. But ultimately, it's no different than your checkbook. If you spend more than you have, you've got to either reduce your costs or increase your income. And reducing costs reduces service to the citizens of the city. In a town where healthcare is a priority. I mean, it's a priority to the economics of the city. So I think what we do is if we can think of ways to increase the revenue side, that would be helpful for the council to think about, to put in their mix of ideas. And to hold fast that we don't want to reduce the quality of the service that we provide.
And
I don't know what good all of that talk just now was, but that's the way I'm thinking of it.
yeah, and I think we're all on the same page here. So we've met with finance, and again, this kind of falls back to Commissioner Meyer's initial statement that we don't want to risk our negotiating power, I guess, if you will, with the clinic, because we are going to be looking at contracts again. But we have those numbers from finance in a couple of different ways on what it costs to run an ambulance run. So we have been working on that. So we do have those figures, but I don't want to pass those out as a packet right now, just due to the fact that
I can appreciate that, Pete. The fact of the matter is, until those kinds of numbers are available to put into this discussion, I don't know really what we're talking about, except we need more money.
Yep, you're exactly right. Yep, I'm here. So I don't know if I can go in a closed session item for common council or not when we're finally able to meet with them. But I think that's be an appropriate place for that, for them to see that, those numbers.
Well, it's good to have that, and finance has it too, but I would think that, you're directly involved with your department and that they would be receptive to the idea of you taking part in that discussion.
Oh yeah, I have them here.
Yeah.
We've in fact, we met, 2 days ago? And, yesterday and crunched those numbers, so.
Well,
No,
I think at some point, the council is either going to ask us for funding options, or they're going to be presenting funding options, which may include upgrading the enterprise fund. It may include eliminating the enterprise fund. And I think we have to have those in mind. If you look at the options, support all aspects of the fire department via property tax would be one option. You could look at, and this was suggested by a retired firefighter, get out of the enterprise fund and have a subscription service. So those are three. That's what Steve is checking out right now, how people are funding it. Again, we need a baseline. I think that data is going to give us some baseline in terms of how these are funded and what services they provide. Now, I agree with Andy, unless we have the baseline, we really can't move forward. We can't move forward and they can't move forward. I don't know whether we're in the position to suggest potential funding options to the council, but I think we have to keep potential funding options in mind.
Well, I don't, there are some clever and dedicated people on the council, and they're going to come up with ideas maybe that we won't. But you mentioned two things just now as funding options. Per capita, which we heard about at our meeting on the 2nd, is a third. If we put those out so that the council is aware that they are alternatives, then as they look at options, the ones that they generate or figure out, and they may be the same, but at least they'll be in their basket. I can't imagine, and I don't like it either. I gotta pay taxes, but some increase in taxes
May be necessary.
may be required. The thing that worries me is that an obvious and simplistic answer to this is to reduce your costs. And you reduce your costs. This happens to be one of those places where there really isn't any fat to cut. So let's take the Lucas devices out, let's take the ventilators out, let's take the training out, we could reduce the cost, but you can't reduce the cost in any way that I can figure out without reducing the quality of service.
Right.
You do not want to reduce your cost to the point that we're going back to what we saw years ago, where the police departments had stretchers in the back of station wagons. That probably is an extreme example for today's EMS programs. But I'll agree with Andy. Funds go down, services go down, quality goes down, and suddenly what is a premier service in terms of actual patient contact, it's a premier service in terms of our reputation statewide, doesn't hold anymore. We have to maintain our premier reputation.
You know, and I'll just interject this. You always, an N of one is always the most powerful. It's your own experience that we've had a family move in to our neighborhood on our block. And one in the family has a serious health issue. And they moved from where they had lived their whole lives to Marshfield because they wanted that individual to be closer to the level of health care he needs and the clinic can provide. This isn't a typical town in many ways because there are people who come here because they're sick, because they need help. An advanced ambulance service responds to that. You know, I don't know how you can diminish the quality of what you do and still serve the citizens of the city the way they should be.
And Mike will remember this. This is a point that people in the council have been making since 2005, 2006, that people are coming here because we've got premier medical services.
And the point of that, when I say point, I mean it's the point of is the ambulance service. You know, if you can drive yourself to the clinic, fine. But if you can't, you call the ambulance. There are people sicker here, more complexly sicker than there would be in most communities. Anyway, other than suggesting alternate forms of increasing revenue, alternate mechanisms for increasing revenue, I don't know what to do right now.
Well, I think once Steve gets the data in, we can look at that data, see how other people are funding, and start to use that as a baseline and use that as a point from which we could potentially suggest some options.
You know, it's obviously a problem statewide, or it wouldn't be an item on the League of Municipalities agenda for their annual meeting. You know, finding out how other cities, municipalities fund their ambulance services, I think right now critical. And if you can,
I have most of the research done. It's not complete, but most of it is done. Just anecdotally, most EMS services are tax-based, or fire-based, or tax-based, along with user fees. Some of them also, actually quite a few of them also have contracts like we do with our outlying communities, and charge a per capita fee. But again, I'll get when the information is complete, I'll get it out to everybody. And as far as this issue, just again, be clear, this isn't just a state issue, this is nationwide. Medicare, federal government doesn't know how much it costs to run EMS. I've mentioned before about the 2-year study. I got more recent information. It's starting out as a 2-year study. They've got several services, including us in the first year. We're studying all of our costs and submitting it to the federal government. Year 2 is in 2023, and I just found out this week that's year 3 and 4 are also on the books. So this is going to be at least a 4-year study to find out how much EMS costs, because even the government doesn't know.
Well, that's surprising.
Yeah, and guess what happens at year 4? They look at the numbers and say, we can't afford this, and nothing happens. And that's a possibility too.
Well, you know, and it's frustrating, but at one level, you know, it makes sense. Medicare, Medicaid is paying, you know, 50% or less, or around 50% of the costs of providing the service that patients get at the clinic and hospital. Well, they could make that up with a single vote of the Congress. But they can't do that because the burden on the taxpayer would be so great that it just, there comes a point where there just isn't any more to grab. And you have to live with that, but you have to accept consequences that are negative. I mean, and there's no way that you can pay half of what it costs and expect that you can continue very long. The money's got to come from somewhere. And I'm getting off track here, but if you look at what the clinic has tried to do for the last couple of years, reduce costs without reducing the quality of service, that's a very difficult thing to do. And it's something, you know, do more with less. Well, at some point you do less with less. I mean, that's just the way the world operates. So I don't, you know, when the finance director says the solution to this problem is to supplement the amount that comes in from the EMS enterprise fund, where does the supplemental money come from? And at this point, I think that's the base question, and it's going to be the council's decision.
See, in my mind, once you talk supplementing the enterprise fund, you may as well either eliminate the enterprise fund and then go to other funding options.
Mm-hmm. Could do that. You know, that's it's interesting. I don't know the history of where the enterprise fund came from, whose ideas and so on. But when you think about it, it was a wonderful idea. It would generate enough revenue, the ambulance stuff would generate enough revenue to pay for itself, and it could be off the backs of the taxpayer. Mm-hmm. And it worked for an extended period. Mm-hmm. But I think of it, there's no spring in it. There's no, if one piece fails, the whole thing suffers, and so now we're 600,000 in the hole.
Right.
Because our income reduced, and there's no place to pick it up. Where does it come from? And maybe it would make sense. I mean, there are lots of funding alternatives out there. We haven't heard all of them, I'm sure. There are too many smart people wrestling with this that they haven't come up with some interesting alternatives that we don't know about. Mm-hmm. But to keep doing as well as we're doing is going to require more money. And where it comes from is the big question in my mind. Right. I've said enough.
I think in retrospect, I mean, in looking back at how we got where we are, again, the bottom line for me, from my perspective, is that we had always budgeted, the city had recommended we budget $25,000 a year to take care of uncollectibles. And that was a given. It was a part of a formula for providing the contracts with rural townships and villages. It was a basis for the budgetary process. Well, in the meantime, you know, and this is repeating a lot of information that's already been put out there, but I need to emphasize that it had gone from $25,000 a year to where You know, in actuality, we're about $100,000 shy. That has to be written off for the books, and the fund needs to make up that difference. But it has not taken place for the last 4 or 5 years. So it's not like a $600,000 shortfall today. It's been a shortfall for the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And it's accumulated to the point where we're at $600-some thousand in the hole. If it had been recommended by the city finance back 5 years ago that we needed to budget 100,000 instead of 25, we certainly would have. And we could have made adjustments along the way to the enterprise fund. And the department could have made their recommendations for a budget based on those figures, but that hasn't taken place, and that's where we are today. And that's where we need to look at alternatives, we need to look at other possibilities, but it has to go back to that recommendation from finance to budget a certain amount for write-offs, because write-offs aren't gonna go away. It's part of doing business.
Right.
And it's, there's no answer for that. I mean, that fluctuates too, from what I understand. It goes from 50% to 56% that's paid by Medicare, and the rest is picked up by us. And if the people are doing our books and our collections aren't able to take care of that, it's written off. And then there's a time period involved for write-offs. So we're fighting a battle there, but I'm certain that if we were given the opportunity to budget for a certain amount every year, the department would follow that recommendation and it would save the enterprise fund.
You know, and now we're getting to the point in my head when we start talking about that, Mike, and the history of it. That's the mechanical stuff that has to get cleaned up. There are some principle level things that we have to decide, that have to be decided, whether it's us and the council or whoever. And then we need to come back and clean up the mechanics, if you like. We wouldn't be in this position if the commission had known the reality of the situation. We would, we just wouldn't have been. Whether it was the commissioner, whether it was the council, if everybody had known what the situation was, we wouldn't be where we are now.
I think that's the maddening part of this whole thing, is that had a red flag been thrown up 5 or 6 years ago, that you're starting to bleed out here, and we knew about it from finance, then we wouldn't even be here talking about this right now.
Yeah, but again, that's a complex issue, and it's a complex bunch of people, and it's we can't go back and make it right. What we have to do is deal with what we have now.
Absolutely.
And we've got a shortfall, and that shortfall is on the shoulders of the council, in my mind, and they will have to deal with it. And the council's dealt with bigger problems than that successfully. And I'm sure they will this as well. What we've got to do is figure out how to get the funding flow so that we don't have to deal with that again. It's just not fair to wind up with $600,000 in the hole and be surprised.
Right.
Well, and then the impression that we've gotten some feedback on from the public is, how did you not know? Well, like the chief said, we don't have an accountant on staff. We just go by recommendations from the city finance department to how to form our budget. Not just this issue, but electricity, payroll, things like that. It all comes down, the first 1/3 of the city budget in a department budget is all handed down from City Hall. And they aren't numbers that you can readily formulate yourself in the department. So the city anticipates what it's gonna cost for fuel next year. City anticipates what it's gonna cost for electricity next year, and they give you a number to put in your budget.
Right.
This is the same. If we aren't addressing the write-offs like we should be, that direction has to come from City Hall, like other portions of the budget are. Every department across the board in the city gets their recommendations. This isn't unique to this department. Every department, the street department, everybody else gets a recommendation for what they should figure for utilities. And there's just a whole basis of standard recommendations that come from the city finance department in preparation of the budget.
Yeah, and they have the opportunity to meet with the auditor as well, who raises flags. And I think this speaks to the last council meeting, where we don't get to meet with the auditor, where he comes through and says, hey guys, looking at this bad debt, let's say, you don't have an allocation for that. We don't get that information. That's all shared up at City Hall during their week-long audit process or whatever. So unless they communicate that with us, we don't know that information. Plus, like you mentioned, we're not the ones that put that number in our budget. That's finance does it. So
What's been encouraging is that Jennifer
yes,
has pinpointed what she figures is one of the problems in this whole process and this communications. And that was very encouraging here to say that, because I think it is a communications problem on top of a few other things. But if she recognizes that as the department head for the finance department, then we can probably be assured that there's going to be some changes as far as policies and procedures in the future and how to handle this budget in particular, but other budgets that we handle.
and Deputy Chief Bakis and I have spoken with Jennifer and Jordan, and moving forward, that communication is going to be there. We all agree on that. Then it just needs to happen, not yearly, not biannually, but maybe quarterly, and we meet and see where, if it stays in EMS enterprise fund, that's the council's wishes, that we're able to meet and see what direction that's headed, at least quarterly.
And as long as we're talking in these terms, and I think I'm probably currently the senior member of the commission. The commission has gone to the city more than once over the last 20 or 25 years and asked for financial reports about the enterprise fund, and was told it's not the commission's affair, it's the city's business. So we've never seen the financials as a commission. We've had no idea what's happened.
I do have a thought on that, Andy.
Yeah.
I know many times in our meetings you have been very hot on. We have commission business, we have things we do, and we do. We do choose to work with the city because it's more financially beneficial to the city that we use their HR and use their finance than to have our own. So really, we're paying the city for a service and saying, why aren't we getting a return? Not that it's ever directly their fault. We probably could have asked better too. Communication is a thing.
Two responses. There are at least two commissions with optional powers that do not use city services. They have their own.
Right.
That's a choice that we could make.
Right.
And as I commented when I was sort of angry at the August 2nd meeting, if we've been paying for professional services, this is an issue that demonstrates we weren't getting very much for our money.
No. I mean, it's uncomfortable, but I mean, if we're trying to not, add expenses, as you say, I mean, this is not the time to put that out there, but we also need to make sure we know what we need to know. So, yes, we need to communicate. Yes, we need to cooperate and play ball.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't be throwing spitballs at each other from our meetings. That's got to stop.
Well, I tell you what, though, you learn from this, hopefully, you learn from the mistakes you make. Whether it's a collective thing, it's the city and the commission and whoever else. You got to look back. You got to figure out what happened so that you can make policy changes so it doesn't happen again.
Right. And I'm not saying we don't address those things. That's all I'm saying. The communication is a key. And yes, the council versus the us in the finance, that's a thing. Unfortunately, you guys now are in a position, and the fire department having to say, hey, this is what we do, because there are misconceptions. I mean, when I was in here talking to Redshift, and is that the same person that was hot with on the phone that was wondering why can't we run this as a volunteer department, or is that somebody else?
Correct, yes.
I have been on the volunteer department. You guys are what, on scene in general in under 10 minutes?
Generally under 7. 4, you try to be under.
I've been on the volunteer department, it took us 10 to 15 to get to the truck,
Right.
which means it took us 30 or better to get to the house. What can a fire do in 10 to 30 minutes? I mean, we've had conversations here.
Doubles in size every 30 seconds.
I know, we've had conversations here about the contents are more flammable, it's more dangerous for you guys, the quicker you get there to aggressively attack it. Of just the fire side, I mean, we're on the EMS discussion, but that supports this. That is a thing, you know?
Right.
I mean, that's a side benefit, you know, I know the EMS fund is, you know, whatever, the money, we'll sort that part out, but that does support the other services of the city, so we're trying to be as frugal as we can here. But, I mean, people need to know what that means. Go talk to them about the response times. I mean, I guarantee you they're double or triple what you guys do, you know?
Yeah, and not only response times, but recruitment nowadays.
Right.
Volunteer services aren't what they used to be 20 years ago. They are having a lot of difficulty recruiting firefighters to even want to do this anymore. And we're even seeing that on the career side, where we can get people, but it's a whole lot more difficult than it used to be. People just don't want to do this job anymore. It's a dangerous profession.
Yeah, there's a volunteer department within 15 miles of here. And I talked to a guy who really wanted to be a volunteer firefighter. He just liked the idea of it. And when he went to his boss said, great, I love it, but you can't make work.
Yeah, so those employees, if they really want that, man up and come down, or let your people go. That, if they really want to do that, they need to consider the cost, because I don't think they're thinking about it. It sounds great on paper, but they don't know the true cost. And we've talked about how we're so close to jumping an insurance level. That is a cost to the city in reduction of fees for them that they can't see till we get there.
Right, yeah, if we were to, you're kind of going down the privatization road, we're gonna lose nine personnel basically who are cross-trained in fire. Yeah, if we lose those personnel, we are not going to ISO 2. We are this close to going on to ISO 2, and what ISO does is, it might not affect the homeowner as much, but it's a draw for business to come into the city, because they'll have reduced insurance rates. Granted, it's not used as much as it used to be as far as ISO, but for the bigger businesses and things like that, I think it matters. Why did PCA come to town? I'll bet they're not paying lower taxes than they were. They came here for the services. We have a full-time fire department. We have full-time EMS. We have a water distribution system that's very good. There's just a lot of services that we can provide that factor into this ISO rating. Whereas if they privatize and we lose, say, 9 personnel, we're going backwards. We are going backwards. And that's going to affect businesses and insurance rates and all that. I want to speak a little bit to Commissioner Keogh's comment too on level of service. Fire-based EMS is, and this is no knock on privatization, this is just how it works. So if you think about it, fire-based EMS is customer-based, it's patient-based, it's focused on level of care. I'm giving the best level of care we possibly can. We're not in it to make, there isn't a business owner or a board of directors that we, are looking for a large bottom line to,
Pay for the condo in Florida.
Correct. Thank you. We're looking to break even with this EMS enterprise fund, pay for 11 2/3 firefighters, pay for all of our ambulances, and break even so the taxpayers don't have to front that. If you privatize ambulance services, there's an owner behind it, they're looking to not break even. They're not going to be here if they're breaking even. They're looking to make money. And we talked about this, Commissioner Keough and everybody else, we've all talked about this, that in order to make money, you're gonna have to do one of two things: increase revenue. And we talked about this with our demographics, over 70% are Medicare and Medicaid. So it's very difficult to increase your revenue. You can't jack up your ambulance fees to $5,000. That's not gonna make any difference because Medicare and Medicaid are still gonna pay the flat fee. So the only way to, for a business owner that would own a private ambulance service to make this work and make enough money to stay here would be to reduce your level of care, period. That means maybe going to EMTs instead of paramedics. That would mean your equipment is older, maybe not as good as what we have. Running your ambulances into the ground where, you know, it might be breaking down. It would be a low staffing level. We know there's studies done out there that paramedics stay in this field for an average of 4 to 6 years. That is how long they stay in the private service. Whereas our paramedics are able to gain that street experience. They're here for 20, 25, 30 years. Your overall level of service is going to decrease with a private ambulance service, period. That's the only way they can make it work. And it's not a dig on private ambulance services. I'm not saying that. There's entrepreneurs out there and that are making money, and that's what they do, but that's not where we're at with fire-based EMS. We are patient-based, patient outcome-based service.
And just to follow up on that, the largest private provider of emergency medical services is traded.
Is what?
Is traded on the New York Stock Exchange.
Oh, yeah.
And it used to be called, well, it's still called American Medical Response. Now it's part of what they call Global Medical Response. They definitely are in it for profit. They've got 36,000 employees. They operate 5 air services, 2 ground services, plus rural metro fire department. They have a fixed wing fleet, they have a helicopter fleet, obviously they have ground service fleets. But when you look at their map, they're primarily located in high density population areas. You're looking right down the West Coast, Washington, California, high population areas, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, swing up to Kansas, parts of the Mid-South, and then they go up on the Northeast. They are basically empty in the Midwest. They've got a flight center in Escanaba and ground service in Grand Rapids, which are the closest to us. They got 2 counties in Iowa. But
What can we do as a commission beyond what we've talked about already this morning to conclude all of this in some positive way for the city and for the ambulance service? I'm until we have more information and have a better sense of where the council is thinking, I don't know what more to do.
Well, and the whole basis for this meeting was to just discuss this because after the joint meeting with the council, it was obvious we all had questions and the fact finding was still in progress, and I just figured, and it served, I think it's hopefully served a purpose today to sit here talking about it, was that the public has a right to know. There was no question in my mind, is this going to be an open or closed meeting? It's healthy to have the public part of the discussion. And it's healthy that they get the information right up front. And that's what we're doing here today. I didn't really look for it to come to any conclusions or strong recommendations or anything, because I think it's a wait and see thing to see what the council asks for. And again, they've got the services available from the department heads here to aid them in trying to make their decisions. But I think it was just a chance to hear our comments from things that we've heard in the public and things like that. And to touch on what we figure is maybe the problem. We have identified the uncollectibles as one problem. Budgeting for it is the big problem. But there's another one that the chief briefly touched on, is that professional services that we've been billed for, that we could talk a little bit more about too. In the last 4 or 5 years, or 3 or 4 years, we've been billed for services from City Hall that we weren't ever billed for before, because we're a business and it's a cost to a business, and they're in the finance department's mind. So we're, Pete, I don't know if you want to expand on that or
Yeah, I mean,
the particulars of that.
yeah, if we're gonna be run as a business, and I touched on this before, that, you know, we're paying professional service fees for finance to manage the money portion of the account. We're paying for IT support to help us with computer programs, things like that. We're paying for admin staff, HR, because we have personnel under the EMS Enterprise Fund. I have to do some calculations on this because I just got this information yesterday, but it seems to me that I don't know if this is fact or not right now. Again, I have to calculate this, but in 2019, our professional service fees went up by $60,000 or $70,000. I'd have to reset that sheet. $70,000. I'm not sure if at that time we were just paying for their personnel, that portion of IT, finance, and admin. But I can tell you right now, I've seen the breakdown of how we're paying for professional services. We're paying for basically 11 2/3 of their entire budget. So I'd like to go back and recalculate that to see why they were raised in 2019, if that's what it is. If we were paying for just their personnel budget, and then they decided, well, we need you to pay for the entire budget. That person's gone, that we did that recalculation up in finance. So that's information I need to find out yet. But anyway, they did increase $70,000 in 2019. I do have some positives. We now have all the numbers. We can now see all the numbers. That is a positive. We weren't seeing all the numbers before as far as expenses. So I think we now have an accurate depiction of what we pay in whole. Weren't seeing that before. Another positive is right now with call volume being up, being astronomical, we're on pace over 4,000 calls. I mentioned this every PFC meeting. We're up almost 20% on EMS runs. That equals increased revenue. Strain on staff, but increased revenue. And right now we're operating 3 personnel short in the EMS fund. That may not look like a positive, but on the revenue side it is. So if we continue to operate like we're operating right now for 2022, we should be in the black.
So what is the cost to the staff?
Correct, and that's what gets lost in all this talk about money, and it makes me a little sick to my stomach. And what gets lost in all this is it puts an extra strain on staff.
It's physical and mental strain
Correct,
on the staff,
correct.
and that is destructive to overall health. It becomes destructive to overall operations.
Thank you.
Eventually
Yeah, and
eventually that strain will cause a death, whether they're there for safety or some patient.
Correct,
We cannot continue to strain them like that.
correct, and that's what makes me,
that's what worries you at night.
it worries me at night, it makes me ill. It really does. That what gets lost in all this money talk is that. I'm not an accountant. I joined the fire service to help people and wanted to be chief to take care of our firefighters and our paramedics. And it's made me a little ill to be just talking money. Because
I've heard the same comments from Chief Bartek. You know, the strain that's on his people, especially with nighttime call.
Yeah.
And of course, in his situation, they didn't have a staff increase for 60 years. No, I have a great feeling for this. You know, I've been in the situation in the classroom in years past where we didn't have enough teachers, so we didn't have that, you know, 1/2 full-time equivalent. So what am I winding up with? I got 32, 35 kids in the classroom. If you teach a laboratory class, that's impossible. That puts a great amount of strain on me. The way I look at it right now, we need a baseline from other services so we can compare and contrast. That then provides us with potential funding concepts. Mike's going to be down at the league meeting, so he's going to get some concepts out of that 1-hour session on how to be funding EMS. We certainly need some sort of fact sheet about our services. And we're going to have to be prepared to show what is the harm going to be to our service area, both for fire and for EMS, if we see reductions. Now, interestingly, not that it relates specifically to us, it's kind of generic. I found this on Baldwin, Wisconsin's homepage for their ambulance service. There's a bit called 2 pages EMS in Wisconsin. I don't know how current this is, but it outlines what EMS is in Wisconsin. I tried to print a copy, but unfortunately, I got the right margin blocks out. You know, 6 words, right side of the page. But it isn't on the Baldwin site, and I also checked, it's on the Amory Ambulance Service site. The Amory Area EMS.com, which might, you know, take a look at that, and that might be a handy thing to have as well.
It always helps me if I have what I think of as principles in mind. And it seems to me with this matter, as a commission, there should be some principles that we hold to. As an example, I would oppose anything that would reduce the quality of ambulance service to the citizens of the city. I will oppose any reduction in the number of people committed to the ambulance service, whatever form that takes. I would be, or I feel like I'm committed to finding ways to provide additional funding support that are separate from the general tax rolls. Don't know if we can do that, but I would like to hold to that being the best kind of answer. And I would hope that the shortfall isn't left to the fire department to cover. As a principle, it seems to me that that's, and I'm not talking about fault, But it seems to me that's a city issue more than it's a fire department issue.
I agree with you. They are managing funds.
There's probably a couple other things I'm not thinking of right now off the top of my head. But no reduction in service, no reduction in personnel, alternate forms of funding to keep it off the taxpayer if we can. Yeah, I think the enterprise fund was a great idea if it worked. It just didn't work. It worked for a long time, but
Yeah, it's not correctly calibrated, I guess. And since it sounds like there's some other things in how the budget works between us and the city that aren't.
Yeah.
I think your thought on principles is spot on, and really it's a government principle. What are we, like the whole city as a government body, here to do? What are we here to do? And I think when people look at the nice, cool, fluffy, let's fix all the roads, put Second Street in, let's make pretty parks everywhere, those things are great. I'm not saying they're not. Love the parks and stuff like that, and whatever the service is. But what is government here to do? Government is here to restrain chaos so all the citizens can be the ones doing good. Now, you guys, there's some good that you guys and the police department have to do. That's your job. The citizens can't do it effectively, right? We're at a level of populace here where we need professional full-time fire and police. That's a given. That's not even a discussion point. But I think the city needs to take a hard look and see what are we here to do? What is necessary for government? Not what we want, not the pretty things. Those things, if you can afford them, great. All for pretty parks and pretty structures and whatever, but some of that stuff can find external sources and doesn't have to come from the stuff that should be funding this. That's my opinion.
See, the problem is the enterprise fund we talk about it that way, it's gonna be run like a business. Well, and it'd be easy for a business to deal with all the problems. If the revenue goes down, the expenditures go down. It's not complicated, or you go bankrupt.
Right.
Well, we're not a business. The ambulance service is not a business. It's a service to the community. And to run it like a business.
It's more like a nonprofit than a business, honestly.
Yeah.
You know, that's what this is.
Right.
I'll tell you what, it is complicated and there are personalities involved and there's all sorts of stuff. But I think if you took the collective will of all of the people that are involved, the council members, the commissions, all 3 or 5 of them, if you took everyone who's sort of playing in the game, I think there is a clear consensus on the part of everybody that what we want is to serve the citizens well.
Absolutely.
To make it a good place to live, to make it a decent city, a good city, to be proud of it. And that can be hard to do, but that's what we've sort of taken on. And so, I don't mind this at all. I like that there's some competition and there's some arguing and there's all of that is fine. I think that sort of comes to the best place. But ultimately, we serve the city. We represent the citizens of the city in matters having to do with the police and fire departments. That's what the commission is.
To go back to a citizen comment, quote, "Since when does the city run a business?"
It's like running a school like a business.
The fire department is a public service, end of quote.
You bet.
Right. And I think, I've said this before, our command staff, and I mentioned a couple people here on the commission. I firmly believe the best PR arm that the city of Marshfield has, and that city government, is right here. It's the emergency medical service. We have numerous contacts every day. I would venture that when you look at the contacts, this many are good, maybe that many are not good. But every good contact, especially with senior citizens, they tell their children, they tell their grandchildren. It goes on and on and on. It's positive PR. We have the excellent reputation statewide. That goes out. We're good for the city.
Well, I think the commission is committed to doing what it can to support the fire department and the ambulance service in the fire department to the greatest degree we can manage. You guys have to help us by telling us what we can do, what you need. You know, as you see it being played out, you need to inform us so that we can, you know, Mike has been involved in city government for, probably 3 or 4 years.
Is that
And he's got insights into how things worked and you know, where to push and where to go to find and just stay in touch and keep us.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page here. I'm just kind of waiting to see councils with their discussion unfolds. It's kind of the next step. We're still gathering as much data as we can. Steve's working on that statewide sheet.
Our goal is to come up with as many possible solutions as we can think of. I think talking with Chief yesterday, one of the ideas of privatization, we had thought about that in the past. We didn't present it at the August 2nd meeting because in our eyes, when we started looking at privatizing, it actually would cost the city more than our current service. So we did not present that as an option. We are including that in future options so that they can see everything.
Well, and I don't think that's a bad idea at all. That's an argument against that it seems to me is easy to make, and it's easy to find all kinds of evidence for that. Just spend a Saturday afternoon Googling private ambulance services, and it's clear. Problem is as decisions are being made. There was a guy at Harvard named Ozabel, and he studied how people's heads work, how their minds work. And he concluded that if you want people to think about stuff the way you would like them to, you have to give them what he called an advanced organizer. It's like a filing system. Where do you put things in the files if you don't have categories? You gotta have the categories first, otherwise it's just a jumble. And his thought was you've gotta give people categories, advanced organizers, to be able to think about things, to deal with them. Then you give them what you want them to know and what you want them to be thinking about. And then you ask them to share with you where they are and check when they do that, have they got a filing system that makes sense? Otherwise, you're disconnected. We really need to think about our public, the citizens of the city and the council, as people that are in the process of making decisions about this right now. And we got to get to them in a hurry. There's no time to waste.
Can we get that body in here to really see, come visit you guys and see what it is? I mean, is that possible? Call a meeting, bring them in here and give them the tutorial. ABC, this is how it works.
You mean the council?
Yeah, have the council come down. Have them come look and see and tell, show and tell as it were. Is that possible?
We can certainly invite them down. I don't know if that would, if you have a quorum issue there.
We have had counselors here occasionally, talks and tours, but I don't think we've ever seen the entire council here.
Well, it might not be a bad option. I know it's probably another meeting for them, just like we are, but I mean, if they really
Well,
want
some
to.
of them would, a lot of the council members, maybe all of them, I shouldn't say a lot of, are really responsive to their job. I mean, they want to do a good job. And maybe that's a good idea, is to, you know, have an open time where you say, look, this is a complex issue. We'd like you to understand the fire department's perspective on all of these things. As many as possible come to the meeting room in the fire station at 6:30, and we'll spend an hour going over all of the stuff in detail, so you know. Would that make sense, Mike? Would they buy that?
It'd be to our benefit to offer that, whether.
I would say not only just in meeting room, show this is what we have, this is what we do, this is the stuff, this is why it costs blah, 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 for this or that, but this does this benefit for people.
Right.
You know, because when I heard you guys had something that did CPR for you, the Boost device, I'm like, why did they need that? But then thinking about it, I'm like, dang, where was that when I was an EMT, you know?
Right.
I mean, there's things that, and it improves patient outcome, which is what you guys are all about.
Yep, it does perfect CPR. Yep.
Yep. And the initial cost from that
I think
was
that's a good
somebody
idea.
donated them. And it sounds like that's continued to be the case
I think that's good.
a lot of times.
Why don't we see if we can try it?
Yeah, I think it's a
Something
great
more on you
idea.
guys, but
Yep, I think it's a great idea, and I'd love to be able to do that, and we can certainly invite them.
And if they're down there, it's gonna have to probably be public, you know, anybody can come in just like any other hotel.
that'd be good too.
Post it as a meeting of the council and have them attend here. And we can take them onto the floor and show them the equipment, and guys can be stationed at one place or another and point things out.
Yeah.
Put the red lights on, go down Peach Street with them, give them rides.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that, certainly. I just didn't know how that would work with quorums and meetings and things.
Well, you just gotta post it.
Yep.
And especially if they were probably gonna ask questions and have discussions, I don't know how they're gonna televise that.
Yeah.
But that's a communications
Well,
problem.
I'd like to add to that too, not just the council, we're always open for questions, tours, again, with that concerned business owner we talked this week. Anybody who wants to come down, if they'd like us to come talk to them at their place of business, we just want the facts out there, correct information. Like you said, we're all in the same team trying to figure this out.
You just simply invite the mayor and the city council and go from there at some point.
The mayor is anxious to know.
Yeah, she's shown a real interest in us.
Yeah, and not just us, but I think, you know, she's new to the job and she's trying really hard to learn. And so an opportunity to, I think that's a good idea. When I think about it, I had both the common council and the county board meet on the campus once each, just to get them in the building, you know, and then you can walk them around and talk about what you do. It makes a difference.
It might not be a bad idea to have us be there if possible, unless you recommend.
No.
You know?
No, absolutely.
And honestly, and that could be a time where you have the show and tell, go to a joint closed session to discuss the numbers, if we have that discussion here afterwards or something, you know? So they can see the stuff and then say, that is why this is.
Well, I would hope
It's right there as a point of reference.
I would hope by the time we meet, they'd have those numbers.
Well,
They're gonna
yeah.
have them pretty quick.
Anyway, council meeting coming up,
Okay.
and I just put this together. Everybody just take a look at that. I just think one of us from the commission should probably be at the meeting and just give a little statement about what we're doing. You know?
I didn't hear anything.
I did.
You were the one who was there, sorry.
I'm sorry, Bill.
Who was it?
Me.
Oh my God, you gotta eat breakfast.
I didn't have time.
Get up earlier.
Come on, let's not pick on Cindy.
Well, my stomach rumbled so loud that it's weird. That's not good.
Steve Mink, did you hear that?
You're lucky. Awful.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if you had any comments or questions.
All right. Should I do this at the next meeting?
Would you like a different face, or, I mean, when's the next meeting?
Next council meeting would be Tuesday, right?
Council?
Yeah.
Is Tuesday, yes.
Tuesday.
Yeah,
Go ahead with that?
sure.
Okay, I'll take care of that.
Chief Fletty pointed out one thing about business coming to town for the services we provide. It being one of the considerations of services we provide. And that's true, that's the responsibility of local government, is to provide quality of life things. I mean, the city doesn't make money on the swimming pool. The city doesn't make money on providing ballparks and the Wildwood Park and the zoo and things like that. So it's not everything's a moneymaker that the city provides. Services for seniors, which the population of seniors is increasing every year, and twofold more recently. And those are services that the city provides that they don't make money on. It's the taxpayers pay for it. When I was mayor, I met with all the larger businesses in town at least once a year. I met with the two medical facilities a couple times a year for discussions. And the bottom line, when I asked the question, what is it that you can figure we can do to, as a city, to that would benefit your business? And the bottom line was continue your efforts in providing quality of life services in the city. And this is a quality of life thing that people recognize and obviously can take advantage of once they're here. And it would be a consideration for more business, like you said, you know, why they come to Marshfield, obviously water and sewer, fire protection, things like that, because we didn't go into a lot of detail about ISO, but you know, the insurance services, some people don't realize that if you live 15 miles from a fire station and you're out in the country, you're paying more for insurance than you are if you live within 4 minutes of this fire station. And the equipment that the department has, the rural department, say, and I'm not picking on anybody but McMillan or Marshfield or Lincoln or any of them, the amount of equipment they have, response, there's a number of things that go into the formula for ISO that provide insurance rates. And you said we're just that far from being up at the level 2. That took a few years to get to that point. And there's other things we can do to enhance that even more by having additional manpower. We're obviously meeting the guidelines for the amount of equipment we need, the ability to pump water. So we didn't really expand on that, but it's something that we're expected to provide the citizens. And as Andy mentioned, we're all in this, we're not in this for any other reason except to help make the city a better place to live. And I think I was running for mayor or something, but it comes to mind from a few years back. I think it can't go without mentioning that one of the positive points in this whole department is the fact that we've got people like Chief Letty and Deputy Chief Bakos, and the work that they put into this particular subject up to this point is commendable. Again, it is information that the city will find useful if they ask. As much as their recommendations should be looked upon as being helpful for them, the city council in making a decision in the future. And then, of course, you know you've got the support of the commission behind everything that you're doing, and I appreciate the work that you've done to this point.
We appreciate it.
Probably.
That's for the both of us, thank you.
I think we're to a point where we're gonna start repeating things. If we don't go on any further. Keep digging for the information, provide it as well as we can, and when we get to that point where we have to, and I should mention, I recommended not bringing on the particulars of how much it costs for ambulance service, and save that for a meeting where we talk to the clinic for negotiations. The negotiation thing didn't come up because of this. The negotiation thing is timed.
Yeah.
It's the time in the contract that we renegotiated, so.
Yeah, we were at the 5-year mark.
Yeah, and so we're not reacting to anything, it's an ongoing process to keep things in line with that contract, so. Fortunately, we'll be able to have some fresh information available when we do go into that, and look forward to what we can work out with the medical facility. Is there anything else you guys want to add? Fire department?
Thank you. I'd just be reiterating a lot of the things that I've said. I mean, we're committed to, you know, protecting the public, serving the public, giving them the best service we possibly can. And that's what our main goals are, and that's what they will remain to be. And that's what we're trying to do here by resolving this issue. So,
It's as important as it is to you as a chief to look out for the crew.
the crew and their citizens.
It's a priority as far as I'm concerned, that we all as a commission look out for the best of the department as far as personnel goes. It's not all numbers.
Yep.
It's obvious with, 24 calls the other day?
Yes.
In one day, in one shift. It's remarkable. I mean, it's amazing they're able to walk around after that.
I would encourage you, first of all, a town of 19,000 that has a fire department with 5 operating ambulances is incredible. That's one ambulance for every, how many, 3,000 to 4,000 people. It's nuts. And that you have 5 ambulances out at a time. I don't think people have the vaguest conception of that. And I think it's important that they do. That there are times when you have 10 people on the road in an ambulance serving people in the city, or that's an amazing number to me. It's just,
Which in turn has an effect on fire protection,
yeah,
which is related now to manpower.
yeah.
I drive by the department every day when I take my boys to school during the school year. And I can see the first 2 ambulances are right here. I can tell if they got 1 or 2 out, and 50% of the time, there's 2 gone. And that doesn't count the ambulances that do long-term transports that are in the back that I can't see from the road. So there could be 3 gone, and I don't know it.
Yeah.
You know, that's 6 guys minimum? Or the guys and gals, whatever, gone, to not jump on the truck and go put out whatever.
I think those kinds of numbers people can relate to. There are days when you have 5 ambulances out at the same time.
Sometimes in the same call.
That's well, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that nobody talks about, but I've talked to 2 former ambulance riders who are retired from here, and they talk about maybe it is post-traumatic stress syndrome, but the things that they wake up at night dreaming about that still troubles them.
Yeah.
The car accidents and the condition of the people they have to treat or drag out dead people dragging them out of cars or whatever it is they do. And that's a lifelong.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
you talk to anybody down here, we've all got our calls that we'll never forget, that do wake you up in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
It's a tough job. It's a tough job.
So,
Well, anyway, I'm
reassure them that we're 100% behind them,
Yes,
110%.
we are.
Okay, anything else anybody wants to add? I think it was a very, very healthy discussion. I appreciate everybody's input. Turned out actually better than I thought it would. And we'll just move on from here.
Well, I was nice.
Wow. I didn't look at you when I said that.
And on the commissioner's last words, he was nice, which of course their secretary's going to record. I move to adjourn.
I second that motion.
Okay, seeing we have a motion to adjourn and seeing no objections, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.